Hello again. So the novel 50 Shades of Grey has caused me some difficulty in the last couple of years. You see, I am a passionate advocate for student reading, and I build my program around the notion that students should be free to choose most of their own reading. There are a number of sound reasons for this that I don't have any trouble defending, but I'm guessing you can already see where this is headed. That's right, a number of my students' independent reading selections have included one, two, or all three of E.L. James's books. It might have been easy for me to just set those aside and declare them unacceptable, but for two things. One, a number of the books that I know well and encourage my students to read have their own sections that might be questionable or controversial. Even John Green, as many of you know, has been declared a pornographer for one section of Looking for Alaska. And two, at a staff luncheon at the opening of the fall semester when the book first came on the scene, I was witness to a discussion that exploded in enthusiastic, if somewhat veiled, discussion of the book that made it clear that most of the women present had either already read the book or wanted to. So I took a somewhat awkward position that any limit on what students choose to read should be decided between them and their parents. And I always recommend that parents discuss what their student is reading, no matter what the book is. So my only rule now is that they can't select pure porn of the sort you'd need to order from the internet or go to an adult bookstore to get. So if you can find it at Target, it's acceptable, even if it's not necessarily something I would highly recommend. And if you've been through a checkout aisle in Target anytime in the last couple of years, you have undoubtedly seen stacks of 50 Shades of Grey on your way to the register. But then the movie came out a couple weeks ago, and suddenly the issue boiled up again. And this time there seemed to be even more people ready to pass judgment. Not just on the book or the movie, but on anyone willing to read it as well. And it brought to mind an earlier story. In 1928, D.H. Lawrence completed Lady Chatterley's Lover. He had already been a controversial figure for a long time, forced into a voluntary exile from his home in England. But this novel, more than any of his other writing, really helped contribute to the fact that at the time of his death, just 2 years later, he was viewed by most people in the general public as little more than a pornographer who had wasted most of his talents. Lady Chatterley was shocking at the time, and it remained so, the building in controversy until 1960, 30 years after Lawrence had died at the age of 44, when the Penguin Books Publishing Company was put on trial under the 1959 Obscenity Act in London. Today that sounds laughable, and the level of sexuality and obscene language found in the book seems tame, if anything, by today's standards. But we aren't incapable of getting similarly up in arms with the challenge of dealing with issues of sex on the printed page today, as millions of readers have scooped up the 50 Shades of Grey series, and millions of critics have similarly wagged their collective fingers at the crowds reading the books and now watching the first movie's release. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to compare 50 Shades to Lawrence's novel, which is now commonly viewed by many as a literary masterpiece. That would hardly be fair. Millions of people last year actually wanted to read 50 Shades of Grey, after all. The biggest thing the two have in common, in my opinion, is that huge crowds of people are ready to pass judgment on the book, in particular, many of whom have never read it. And let me make this clear right away. I myself have never read 50 Shades of Grey, and I don't have any intention to do so anytime soon. I haven't seen the movie, and I don't expect to do that either. I did read Lady Chatterley's Lover back when I was in college. What I know about the E.L. James book is only a very general idea of the story based on its public reputation and a collection of student reviews, and a few passages read on the Fine Brothers' Elders React YouTube series and similar presentations given for shock value and to lambaste what seems to be a laughably low level of writing quality. That, and in the wake of the movie's release, a number of YouTube channels have discussed the issue, and messages in the comment streams seem to be that it's a very inaccurate portrayal of the bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism community and its practices, which I also know almost nothing about, and which has made me wonder if there's been a wholesale revamping of standard sexual activity in the years since AIDS came on the scene. I mean, really, am I the only one left who finds the need to have a safe word beyond stop it, or maybe stop it, I mean it, unnecessary and maybe even a little silly? But I'm not here to judge, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be the case for most people discussing 50 Shades of Grey. You see, here's the thing. I want my students to read. I'd like them to read good books. But what is a good book? To me, a good book is one that speaks to the reader, one that they can make some kind of connection with. To me, that's much more important than if a book makes sophisticated use of classical allusions or a pretty show of lofty erudition. Not that either of those is a bad thing either. But for many, many readers, apparently, 50 Shades of Grey makes that connection. And I don't believe it's all, or even mostly, about sex. There are two other stories that I see closely related to 50 Shades, in particular to 50 Shades and its readers. The first of these, coincidentally, had its movie release just a week after that of 50 Shades of Grey, and that would be the new live-action version of Disney's Cinderella. And the second is another Disney classic that is scheduled to have its own live-action treatment as well. Beauty and the Beast. How can I make such comparisons? In the student reviews that I've read, they see and value the story of Anastasia and Christian in the same way they might see Cinderella and Prince Charming, because many high schoolers, and many middle-aged married women as well, feel a strong connection with Cinderella. Overworked, undervalued, and abused. And they long more than anything else to be seen, to be recognized, and to be valued. And if that recognition came from someone who is strong and handsome and powerful and maybe even rich, someone willing to take over all their worries and cares, well, would that be so bad? And yes, I know, Christian Grey goes too far. He takes away all need or even option for Anastasia to think for herself, to make decisions about her own life. But sometimes I'm beginning to think that these unsophisticated high school girls and middle-aged housewives are also capable of recognizing and remembering something that all these erudite critics forget, that this is a book, a story, a fantasy. So if the man in question is brutal and treats the woman as a possession, at least she's treated as a treasured possession. And that's something that few of these girls and housewives alike are finding in their day-to-day lives. And which brings us to the second story, Beauty and the Beast. Under Anastasia's influence, Christian Grey is willing to change. This comes in the second and third books. What flaws he has will be corrected. He will evolve until the pair do indeed find their happily ever after. Because he does, in the book, care for Anastasia. He sees her. He listens to her. She is important to him. And again, this is something sadly lacking in the lives of too many women of all ages. Is this story convincingly told? Not to me, no. Do I think it sets a good pattern for romantic relationships? Almost certainly not. Would I want my daughter to see this as a healthy relationship, a model for true love and devotion? Not at all. But then, would I want my daughter to base her love life on Romeo and Juliet? Catherine and Heathcliff? Daisy and Gatsby? No. No. And no. And I hope my daughter has better judgment and can appreciate better books than 50 Shades, too. But if she didn't, I would understand one thing. She would become a better reader and be on her way to being open to better books, more from actually reading the 1,650 pages of the 50 Shades trilogy than she ever would by carrying around 300 pages of some classic literature that she had never actually read. I haven't read 50 Shades of Grey, and I don't want to read 50 Shades of Grey. But if someone else does, I'm good with that. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to be awesome. I will talk to you again. Soon, hopefully.